You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions.
You're listening to Mysteries and Monsters. I'm your host, Paul Bestall. The Fortean realm is full of mysterious cases that often get overlooked or left behind until someone finds a calling to it. On this episode, I'm delighted to finally welcome my dear friend Kate Rae to the show to dive into one of Nottinghamshire's strangest cases, that of the Wollaton Gnomes. With the Fae and Folklore wrapped around the conversation, you'll find some cases really are stranger than others. But before that, of course, don't forget you can support Mysteries and Monsters by signing up at patreon.com/mysteriesandmonsters. $4 a month gets you ad-free episodes, guaranteed early releases, bonus content, and more. And you can also click the link in the show notes to join too. A big thank you to my latest patrons, John, Richard, Zan, Dave and Sarah. Welcome to the team, and thank you to each and every one of you that continue to support me and the show with your contributions. You can find Mysteries and Monsters across most social media platforms. Please subscribe to the Mysteries and Monsters channel on YouTube. You can also visit our website at mysteriesandmonsters.com. And don't forget, our exclusive merchandise site is available via TeePublic, and you can find the link for that in the show notes too. Our intro and outro music are performed by the marvellous Weary Pines. And thank you to Dean Bestall for his wonderful artwork. And the show is produced by Mr. Brennan Storr of the Ghost Story Guys. So let's join Kate as we ponder some of the more stranger cases in the Fortean realm. The world of the Fae and Folklore has probably never been more popular in the United Kingdom, and my guest today has immersed herself in amongst the high strangeness. A wonderful artist, a thoughtful paranormal investigator, published author and podcaster, Kate Rae is also one of the loveliest members of our strange and wonderful community. Kate, I am delighted to finally welcome you to Mysteries and Monsters rather than harass you at a variety of paranormal conferences up and down the United Kingdom. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and what a welcome that is. That's probably one of the best introductions I've ever had, so you're making me blush already.
Butter you up, make you malleable, Kate.
Yes, I like your style.
As I said, I mean, we've bumped into each other here and there. We've spoken, we've known each other online. Always take time to say hi and have a chat and try and make each other laugh and talk about weird things. So it's probably one of the most overdue interviews I've had on the show, Kate. But I'm delighted you're finally here because we always have a nice natter when we meet each other in real life, which is often strange and is often one of the great joys of going to conferences and things, is that I get to see people outside of the little square boxes where I normally talk to them, Kate.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same. You find out so much more, don't you, when you're in the company of people than on the internet, because you know, the internet, we can all put up these perfect lives and the exciting things that we're doing. But when you're with somebody personally, and you can take those conversations that little bit further as well. Online, I find there's a barrier. There's always a barrier there. So, and it's always a joy to bump into you at conferences. You always got a smile, and like you say, we always end up chatting things seriously weird.
Yes, absolutely. And it's been good. I mean, I didn't expect to see you twice in 2 weeks, but that's how the cookie crumbles for us sometimes, doesn't it?
It is, yeah. We went to the fabulous Strange Days Festival, which was amazing. Yeah. And then, of course, the absolutely lovely Parameet, which is my staple diet a couple of times a year, that one is. Yeah.
It's very nice, isn't it? And especially, there's a few of us now who seem to be popping up all over you and the other Kate, Dr. C. It's like a trio of weirdos hanging around because we seem to keep bumping into each other, which is lovely because you're both marvellous and you always spend time chatting with me about all kinds of weird things. I mean, for you, when you look back, Kate, at some of those strange experiences you had as a young child growing up, and you look where you are now, did you think, for someone who's grown up most of their life terrified of poltergeists, that the paranormal and folklore would be your meat and drink as a as a more mature person.
No, and I often say that if I was to meet my 15-year-old self now, because that was kind of the pinnacle of when I was getting to the research side of things and really sort of inspired by all things weird, I would be spinning cartwheels as a 15-year-old, knowing that I'm doing what I'm doing now. Prior to that, I'd probably like, get out, it's all bad, get out, don't touch it, you know. So yeah, I mean, I like you say, I used to have a deep fear of poltergeist activity. I've now got a deep fascination with it. It's kind of flipped that coin for me massively, and that was the kind of starting point as a child, that really bizarre fear.
Well, to be honest, I think sometimes it's good to be afraid of things we don't understand. And I think too often there's too much bravado sometimes in this field, with a lot of people who like to try and create situations where they antagonise things or they make the atmosphere a little bit difficult. And I've never really understood that kind of approach, because if you walked into a restaurant and started shouting at people, I want some food, give me some food, where are you, where is my food? More often than not, you'd get thrown out or people would ignore you or you'd end up being arrested. And so I've never understood this philosophy of charging into alleged haunted sites and locations and start ranting and raving at things you hope might decide to then respond.
Yeah, I mean, there's the other flip side of that, though, where there are places that we go and investigate as investigators. I'm not talking residential hauntings or, you know, schools or places like that, but particularly prisons. I find it fascinating that people are respectful of the spirits in there, because it's like, for me, there is a certain element when you get the spirits of the dead that they are trapped in this purgatory type layer between not being able to move on and the material world, because they're going through, and this is just my own theory and I'm sure it's other people's theory, but they're going through a karmic cycle and they have to go through the karmas of their life before they can move on. Now, there's twofold of this. I have been into a well-known prison before, and I found two guests that were on an event with us who were sat in a room on their own, encouraging, opening up portals of light, for however woo-woo you want to take that, and encouraging the spirits to come forward and go through this portal of light that they were creating. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. We're in a Class C prison here. We're talking murderers. We're talking the most disgusting human beings on the planet that obviously haven't gone through their karmic cycle of understanding that what they did was so wholly wrong that they can't move on, and yet you're handing them a golden ticket to the afterlife without any kind of retribution. Maybe let's have at the very least a counselling session with those spirits and say, you're not moving on because you haven't understood what you've done, or even just saying, do you know you're dead, sometimes helps the situation. So I think in terms of, and not so much antagonism, but there are places and spaces where I don't have respect for the dead. And that's a horrible thing to say, because I don't think it's good for the dead either. I think you're absolutely right. Would you get away with it in a pub? Would you get away with shouting at people in a pub? No, you absolutely wouldn't. However, if you went into a pub somewhere in a really nasty part of London, you don't walk in as an open, sort of friendly person. You put a persona on, don't you, to sort of guard yourself from those characters. And I think we have to kind of weigh that up as well. I'm not the kind of person who wades in and shouts, you know, come on, spooks, have me. You know, it's like, no, you're not. You know, I can't understand when people say, touch me, use my energy, touch me. It's like, no. I'm not going to ask that in a pub, at a bar. I'm not going to ask that of spirits of the dead.
Yes. I mean, I suppose people would be quite surprised these days, Kate, in regards to your love of the paranormal, because I think often when we work in these particular fields, I think people can sometimes decide what they think your specialism is or your main train of thought is in regards to some weird subjects under the Fortean umbrella. And so people might be a little surprised to see you have such an interest in ghosts and hauntings and the paranormal, because I would imagine if people can't be bothered to dig deep enough, they'll just presume that you are folklore and fae adjacent, as we joke. But I think this is often the problem, because I think some people are quite surprised when they they understand that I'm really interested in things outside of cryptids. I don't know why people think I'm all in for cryptids, because I just love all kinds of weird stuff. And then when I start talking about weird true crime, they're like, "Oh, that's a bit too strange." And I was like, "Well, no, I think it's all odd in certain things." I mean, obviously, I was reading an article earlier. There's the famous cold case of the gentleman that was found dead in the hawthorn bush 80 years ago, which has never been solved as to what happened to him. And it's all mixed up in a whole range of high strangeness, with dogs being hurt and disappearing and other people being strange and things. And I can't remember the chap's name, but it's a very odd case. And so things like that, I've always been amazed by it. They've always made me scratch. Or the weird case from Australia with the dead man that was found on a beach one morning, whose name also escapes me. But for me, they're quite Fortean because they're odd. And therefore they're strange cases. Unfortunately, just because a person has passed away as part of it doesn't necessarily take away the stranger aspects of it. And so for you, are you one of those people who loves everything, but at the moment what you are focused on is that you've got a real passion for the Fae and Folklore, and especially our friends from your locality of the gnome variety?
You're right, where people sort of pigeonhole me and then sort of take a back step when especially in the paranormal community, because I'm known in the paranormal community, and they take a step back and go, fairies, what on earth is that about? It's usually that way around.
Yes.
It's not, it doesn't ever come from the fairy community. When you say, I'm a paranormal investigator, they're just like, oh, we understand that it's part of it. And I think, like you, it's anything curious. And I grew up on reading 14 times. So, from back to back in 14 times, you'd get alien big cats, you'd get alien abductions, you'd get ghost watch, you'd get strange deaths, you get your weird sidelines, your medical bags. But that's me, and that's you as well. It's kind of, we are 14 times magazine in our head.
Yes.
And it's all of a oneness. It's all of the curios of things that are just on the fringes of natural. And it's the curio of that, isn't it? It's kind of what I imagine it would be like in the Victorian Edwardian times to have a grand tour, the excitement of going to new lands that nobody's ever been to and finding animals that nobody's ever come across. We live in a world that's so small that the last curios, I think, are curios of the strange. That's our driving force. It's not one particular thing. Fairies have always been there, in sort of baked into who I am, and the ghost side of it has always been baked in. Fairies are kind of kept with from being very, very young. The ghosts I absolutely shut down to the point I could not read Ghost Watch in 14 times because it petrified me, and I wouldn't sleep for weeks. So I put the ghosts to one side, and I had a big birthday, and I won't give away a lady's age or anything, a number of years ago, and I wanted to give it some kind of marker. And I was talking to my brother about it, who's also a 14 fan, and we were saying, what kind of thing do you want to do? Most people do things that scare them, swimming with sharks or bungee jumping or rock climbing. And he said, what scares you? And I said, poltergeists. So we sat there for a minute or two thinking, well, how on earth could I put myself in a position where I was experiencing poltergeist activity? So the next best thing was I booked myself onto a ghost hunt with an events company and found myself in St Breville's Castle on my own without any friends, network support, but obviously there was other people there. And after the first night of being so petrified, laying in bed like a plank of wood, waking up in the morning from about an hour's sleep so stiff because I was so scared, I decided it was a ridiculous way to live my life. And from there on in, the universe handed me just bucket loads of experiences. I very quickly joined a local ghost hunting club. Within months, I was part of GPE, which is Barry Guy's ghost events team. And it was just, I wasn't even asking for these things. It was because I was so excited about the curiosity of it all. It just kept being laid on me. And things like writing for Haunted magazine, that came out of, I was doing a parapsychology course and I submitted one of my essays for Haunted magazine, and then I now find myself as a regular writer, and it just took a life of its own, and I loved that. I didn't know what was round the next corner, and that's what gives me a buzz for life. Not knowing what exciting journey is going to come up next.
How did you find yourself turning your back on ghosts, Kate? Was it due to personal experience? Was it due to the paranormal culture? Because occasionally I had the same kind of reaction to ufology for about 15 years after the 90s. I just thought, I don't ever want to hear about Roswell ever again. You know, I'll wake up in a cold sweat if I hear the word Roswell. I'll be like, oh no, not again. Please, can we talk about some other cases? And it's interesting now where I've rediscovered my love for them all again. And I think we all go through this. Mine was culturally imposed because I was sick to death of crap and people just dragging the coals over the old cases time after time after time. Why did you have that reaction? Because as I say, same as me, we both grew up with strange paranormal incidents, encounters as children. Some people embrace it. I mean, I kind of stepped away from it because it wasn't part of my life for quite a while. Not unfortunately, but sometimes that's the cards you dealt with. But I'd always maintained that sort of very low-key interest to myself. It was always bubbling there. I just wasn't sort of up front and centre about it. But I'm intrigued as to why you would block off that part of the fortean.
Well, I mean, that's very, very deep-seated. Classic grey aliens and ghosts, particularly poltergeist activity, scared me as from the word go. I cannot explain how utterly deep-seated this was, and with no apparent trigger at all. So growing up, those were the two subjects. You know, when people say about phobias,
Yes.
I couldn't even start a thought pattern of what it'd be like to be haunted by a poltergeist without going into a state of panic. And it was the same with classic grey aliens. So I was taken to see E.T. at the cinema, and apparently I cried all the way through it and was telling everybody he's evil. You know, the E.T.'s evil, and why people are saying he's cute. And even now, I look at him and he makes me shudder. I can't stand E.T. So this was kind of, I don't know where it came from. I used to have reoccurring nightmares right the way up until in my 20s about poltergeist activity. I didn't even know what it was called. I didn't even know anything about it. I hadn't been exposed to anything as a young child. We had some haunting activity in two of the properties that we lived in when I was growing up, but nothing hugely significant. I then, later on in life, the very first house that I bought was incredibly haunted and terrified me, absolutely terrified me. But that turning point was that birthday of I've got to be brave. So I would look at everything other than those two subjects. So classic grey aliens were off the board for me up until probably in my 30s. Ghosts and hauntings was something I couldn't. This is ridiculous, right? I couldn't even watch Most Haunted. I honestly,
that
Most
is bad.
Haunted. It is so bad. Because my brain would be, I was such in the belief. And I'll tell you, when I first started to do paranormal investigation, I was still very, very terrified about everything within that. And I had a moment of stupidity. I went to bed one night and I had this bizarre theory in my head that ghosts could actually read your thoughts. There was some kind of telepathic, telekinetic, whatever kind of relationship that you could have with ghosts. So in my head, I said, if there's anybody about, would you let me know? And of course, 3:00 in the morning, absolutely classic time of the night, I had a vase of flowers at the bottom of the bed when thrown halfway across the room, taking all the items off the dresser with it.
Wow.
So I was like, okay, I know this is real and I ain't messing with it. I am not messing with this. You know, I'm not asking those questions again. So I was still very, very terrified at that stage. And it's not until probably a year into paranormal investigation where I clocked up, you know, a good number of hours out on investigation, that I started running towards things instead of away from it. Because something snapped in my brain and said, look, this is what you're here for. You're here to find out what's happening. You're here to find out what's going on. You're not here to run away from it anymore. And whether that made me brave or whether that made me stupid is debatable.
I think that's the thing sometimes. You've got to grasp the nettle, as they say, Kate, with these kind of things. It's the same as me doing this. My brother had been at me for years. You should do this. You need to do this. This will help you This is what you're meant to do. And I kept saying, yeah, whatever, mate. And I've always joked that when I bought my microphone, it sat on the shelf for 6 months staring at me because I was terrified. I daren't do it. And here we are. It'll be 7 years next year. 400 episodes in my belt. I'll do 2 shows.
Wow.
So I think sometimes once you embrace it, I think it kind of gives you opportunities and direction that perhaps a lot of us have been quite listless through most of our mid-adult lives, I think, sometimes. And we get to certain ages like 30s, 40s, whatever, and we suddenly go, what are we doing here? Why are we here? What do I want? Where do I want to be? What do I want to know? And I think once you open yourself up to that, that's where, whatever, destiny, manifestation, your true calling seems to lasso you and pull you in the direction that you were always meant to be in. It's just that normal society has kind of shoehorned you a little bit or sort of pushed you into a cul-de-sac of trying to fit in and be normal, which more often than not makes us ill.
Yeah. I mean, it's that old adage of what is success? What is it measurable by? And who is it measurable by? You know, it's such a hollow word for me, success. You know, I don't, that for me is a competitive world. And we've all had normal jobs, mainstream jobs. We've all done jobs that we don't want to do, that kind of thing. And it's soul destroying, absolutely soul destroying, because there's very few jobs in that kind of mainstream arena where you can be authentically yourself 100% of the time. You take on a role. That's why it's called a job role. And it's not necessarily authentically yourself. But like you say, when you step into that authenticity and say, this is what I want to do, this is where my passion is, you know, most of us are as poor as church mice, but the happiest people on the planet. You know, it's because it's not about the money anymore.
Well, I think often people merge fame and success together and presume it's the same thing. And I often will always say there's a very clear distance between what is success and what is fame, because you can be famous and not successful. And you can be successful and not famous. They are not the same thing. You can be famous and successful, but they're not the same thing for me. And I think a lot of people tend to misattribute those aspects of life to how they're seen or how they value their worth, as it were, Kate. And I think it's what matters to you that's success. If you think doing something is success, then that's all that matters. And if people that matter to you are proud of what you've achieved and can see the joy it gives you as a person, as an investigator, as an author, that's success. And for me, that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I definitely think you're right. And I think that one key indicator for me, and I'm sure it's true for other people, is if you are compelled forward, that you know that you're being true to yourself, and that to me is success. So if you wake up in the morning and you are compelled to do something, and it's a pull that you can't explain, you know, you're compelled to write something, you're compelled to put a conference notes together, you're compelled to make something or compelled to research something, and it's a driving force of its own, and that comes from following your passion. Once you follow your passion, it will propel you in a really positive way. I mean, it's not a continuum for me, you know, but I have pockets of time where I wake up in the morning and I am excited to get out of bed because I know I've got a project on and I'm loving it, and I've just had a new kind of chink moment with it, and I have to get up and get going with it. And it's not work, you know. I can sit for hours upon hours upon hours and be the happiest I've ever been in that situation, you know, because it's my passion and my driving force propelling me forward.
I suppose as well it is good because there's a lot of mindfulness in this, I think, for us, Kate. Most of us that have a variety of strings to the bow, though, to be honest, the way this book I'm writing is going, it's the farthest thing from mindfulness I could possibly achieve, I think, at the moment. Just getting the bloody thing done will give me some calmness, I think. And so it is strange how I'm, you know, sometimes I question, does it matter? Is what I do interesting? And then you just get a random message or somebody will email you or something, and the change in your personality or how you feel or how you view yourself, because often we're our hardest critics, or we think, are we really as good as people tell us? And I think there's a lot of imposter syndrome, I think, sometimes when we work in these niche fields where we sometimes think, should we be a bit more out there, or are we happy to plough our own furrow and not really bother about it? And I think it's finding that balance once again of what is success to you and how you value the work you do.
Yeah, and I think you're right with the imposter syndrome. And you speak to anybody who puts themselves front and centre in anything, whether it be, public speaking, whether it be writing, whether it be singing, whether it be, anybody, I think, who comes across as genuine and will tell you that they absolutely panic and they think, am I this person? What have I done? I mean, it must be the same for you. Self-promotion for me internally is crippling. It's absolutely crippling, that self-promotion aspect. And I always get into trouble from people I know. They'll say, you didn't mention this, Kate. Nobody knows that you're doing this. You don't promote X, Y, and Z enough. And it's like, I don't want to bother people. I don't want to bug people, and they're like, no, people want to know. People want to know. And it's like, well, that bit of body of work for me is gone. I'm on to the next thing. And I'm kind of propelled forward for that. And going back and going, hi, have you seen this? It just, I don't like it. I don't like it. But I actually find that the best people out there who are doing the research and giving talks and sort of putting the work in have all got that. Will all say, even those who have got like doctorates and whatever will say, I don't know whether I'm good enough. I don't know whether this is good enough. So, it's just the human condition, isn't it?
It is. And then I suppose another aspect of the human condition is the belief in the wonderful, the mysteries, the strange. And I think they're very much intrinsically linked. And as I said in the introduction, I don't think folklore and the Fae have ever been as popular or as openly spoken about without fear of persecution as they are in the modern age, Kate. Because I think, as someone that went from this, I mean, it's primarily doing this show, if you'd have said to me 10 years ago about Fae and Folklore, I'd have said it was all stuff and nonsense. And what a waste of time. Now, I'm like, what an idiot. Why were you such a dickhead about these particular subjects? Because I've got to know so many people and I've heard so many things and I've spoken to people such as yourself and I've read your work and I've read your articles and some of our other wonderful colleagues in this field like Claire Casely or Joe Hickey Hall. People who have really made this conversation 15, 20 years ago, as you said at the beginning, some kind of woo or out there. We have proper adult conversations without fear of ridicule. And so for me, even at my level, I always thought I was open-minded. I clearly wasn't. I blocked lots of things off, and I still do. I mean, there's some absolute nonsense. I mean, I've seen a video today about somebody claiming there's 5 million reptilian aliens on 3AI Atlas or whatever, and they're all on their way to take us. And I'm like, what? How can you sit there and talk about that on a video and be taken seriously? That for me is out there, That for me is woo. Talking about a worldwide phenomena that has affected differing people and places throughout the history of humankind now doesn't seem strange at all. What was your challenges like? Because I think often it's difficult enough for male investigators to accept the Fae, but I think the difference you sometimes get is it's often put forward as some kind of gender role that the Fae are all like Tinkerbell, which is nothing like the entire body of evidence until we get into the sort of last 100 years where they become Disneyfied.
I mean, to be frank, when I first started, so like I say, the fairy aspect started for me very, very young. And I was always under the understanding that they were nothing like the storybooks. And it used to make me annoyed when I would see the flower fairies. Is it Barker, Cecilia Barker? Baker.
Yes.
I can never remember. Her flower fairies used to annoy the hell out of me as a child. And I knew that they weren't like that. And it wasn't until I was a little bit older that I came across the work of Brian and Wendy Froud, saw his artwork, the beautiful Labyrinth movie, that kind of thing, that I just thought, somebody gets it. Somebody gets what these things are. And that was my first introduction to there's something to this. So I'd always had that fascination with the truth of what fairies are, and skip forward to being a paranormal investigator. The two worlds collided through various different ways. And when I started talking to my colleagues about fairies in a haunting aspect, of course you can imagine the backlash that I got. Lots of jokes, you're insane, what are you talking about? I did have some very good people who were very supportive of the time though. And I took the plunge very early on and decided to go out to conferences and start speaking about them to ghost hunters, basically, to say, there is a possibility that these non-human entities are part of a haunting environment, as well as, spirits of the dead. And it's not just spirits of the dead and demons we're dealing with. And we can see that historically, and like you say, globally. When you look at hauntology, the aspect of a ghost haunting, the aspect of a ghost being this terrifying spectral image is fairly modern. It's fairly modern. Prior to that, ghosts would have been ancestral worship. So we would have called on the spirits of the dead to help us, imbue us with knowledge. And that ran concurrently with fairy faith. So those two things ran together throughout, even as oral traditions and then into written histories. We see that change through medieval times, and then with the witch trials, it got compounded as something very, very evil, and ghosts and talking to the dead, very, very evil. Fast forward, so we've got all that kind of melting pot within society, and then fast forward to Industrial Revolution. And I said this on a podcast the other day, and it's a very crude way of looking at it, but you've got a raft of fat, wealthy old men with lots of money that sit down and decide that the way that the world is civilized is if you work 6 days a week in a factory and go to church on a Sunday. And we've got no room for this tosh anymore. You've come out the country, it's our rules, it's not civilized to talk to these beings.
Yes.
And then we turn it round that these same fat, wealthy men go, oi, oi, we can have a bit of Savaloy to the eyes if we turn these fairies into something a bit sexy. So we've got this, the absinthe fairy who's kind of sat there half naked, and it's okay for fairies to be half naked, but not women. It's you can have that on public display because she's got wings. Take her wings off and you're a pervert. So we've got a whole about 100 years of cultural kind of battering from then that says, we went from that sexualized being into, things that were etherical and lovely and spiritual, into, Walt Disney's doe-eyed, sneaky little trickster, again, scantily clad Tinkerbell. So it's absolutely no surprise that my first response from the community was, "You're having a laugh, Kate. Fairies, dark side of fairies, hauntings, nah, you've totally lost the plot." So it's not surprising, because we've had this indoctrination, a massive indoctrination, away from the truth of what fairies actually are. And they're dark, and they can be evil, and they are the true tricksters. They are the quintessential tricksters. There's nothing that they do other than deceive, even if it is in the most whimsical way. They are deceivers, and ones to be watched.
Well, I remember a few years ago, I think the thing that solidified it for me was I had 2 episodes back to back where I talked with a demonologist, and then I spoke with Morgan Daimler about the Fae. And the week after, I ended up becoming infected with quinsy, which is a Victorian disease, and they had no idea how I'd contracted it, and I was a bit of a sort of attraction in the A&E for junior doctors, because senior doctors were bringing in junior doctors to see me because none of them had ever seen a patient with quinsy. And so I was like some kind of exhibit for a couple of hours, and which was great, Kate. But I had to stick my fingers into my throat to be able to say hello, because I couldn't talk because my throat was swelled up. And I was admitted to the contagious diseases ward at Sheffield, Hallamshire, and was given the best antibiotics I'd ever had. That special medicine that they give you in hospital that cures everything. And I remember suddenly the whole infection burst, and they said, oh, yeah, you've got to be ready for it. It's not nice, and it wasn't a very particularly nice smell, but it was nice to be able to breathe and drink. But they'd given me, I don't know what it was. It probably was Valium. I have no idea, because I hadn't slept or eaten or drank for 3 days. I was basically dehydrated, exhausted and starving. And they gave me this thing. And after about 5 minutes, I went, whoa, I knew, shall we say. I had a history of being able to spot that kind of response, shall I say, in myself. And all of a sudden, little balls of light started going, pew, pew, like old camera flashes going off. And then the next thing, I'd got half a dozen Fae whizzing around my bed saying,
wow,
we've just come to check if you're okay. And because I was able to know that I was attached to a drip, and it had been a comedy of errors, my stay in hospital. You know, you accidentally moon at a patient because you don't realise your curtain's open and you're changing your jam. It was that kind of, it was 24 hours of hell, Kate, really, both personally and medically. And but it just made me laugh, and I just went, okay, I'm probably hallucinating. It's the medication. But the thing was, I didn't understand why my brain had gone, we're going to see that. Why didn't I see Bigfoot coming to sit on my bed? Or, the ghost of a famous Sheffield person come visit me, or a grey alien. No, it was a group of fairies that I'd always kept at arm's length, just appeared. And whilst I don't believe that was a real situation, my respect for the subject basically changed within 2 weeks and the irony of covering those two subjects, getting a very old-fashioned disease and then hallucinating, kind of sent me on a different path. And I've always treated them with a lot more respect from that point on.
I wonder that the kind of the wondering part of me thinks, did they give you that disease because they knew it from the Victorian era that you knew was a strange disease, just so that they could pop by and go, we are real, hello.
Well, when I went to the hospital, they were quite surprised I knew what Quincy was. And I said, well, I've got an A-level in history. I'm very aware of what Quincy is. It's like the worst case. I've never heard of it.
It sounds like a beautiful disease, that does, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's essentially the worst version of tonsillitis you can get. And it can kill you, essentially, because it's extreme blood poisoning. So I caught something. I mean, they said you could get it from a scratch, gardening. Basically, it's a bacterial infection that somehow gets into your blood. And it's quite rare, but it happens. It's like people who get tetanus gardening. That's one of those, you can get tetanus if you cut in roses and things. It's just one of those things. And so that just made me chuckle, other than coming down with a bit of Black Death. Okay, and I'm not really sure what other ye olde disease they could have struck me with to kind of say, right, are you ready to take on and move forward from this point?
Yeah, I think that was definitely the least of all the horrible things they could have done. I was just thinking then leprosy would have been, limbs dropping off and all sorts would not have been nice at all. At all.
Yeah, I draw the line at dropping bits off me. Breaking things, no problem. I've broke most bones in my body. Okay, so that would be fine. I think there's only my pelvis and my jaw I've yet to damage in some extent. Everything else, I've cracked it, snapped it, chipped it, whatever. But that's just me.
I do say to people though, once you open yourself up to fairies, you have to be very careful because they will take note. And I say that slightly tongue in cheek, but only ever so slightly tongue in cheek. So when I was writing my book, my publisher at the time, he liked strange subjects, but fairies wasn't his thing, and particularly gnomes. And even now, that was my original publisher. He will send me photographs of gnomes that he's come across in weird situations and saying, "You were bloody right. They're following us everywhere we go." And it's like you open yourself up, and that's it. They're there. They will absolutely be there.
Yeah, it is. It is. I think from that point on, I have hit proper open-mindedness, I think, really, Kate. And I had an example of that earlier this year. I received a Reiki massage for the first time. I thought, I've never done it. I went to a pagan festival here in Sheffield and somebody was doing it. And I thought, well, 25 quid for half an hour, let's give it a go. I was out like a light, me, getting all these strange... I was literally off with the fairies, as it were. But I kept getting flashes of an owl. Now, I love owls. I think they're an incredible animal. We've got a few here. I love listening to them at night and calling, and I just find them fascinating, and the way they can swoop in and they don't make a noise. They're just incredible creatures. One of our most beautiful, as they are around the world. But I'm glad we don't get some of the real big ones that you can get abroad. And so I was like, what? Why is this coming into my head? And so when I'd come round and had a minute and sort of relaxed back into being myself rather than being off and very, very relaxed, I went and went round the corner where the rest of the stalls were, and there was this beautiful stall which was full of lots of precious stones and emeralds and things and all kinds of beautiful crafted objects there. And I saw this little owl. And as soon as I saw it, I thought, right, I'm going to have that. I've got to buy it. I don't know why. I don't know what it means. But I just thought, well, I've just done that. And that's the only thing that came through for whatever reason. Therefore, there is a reason for that. So I bought it. And he sits up there looking down at me and keeping an eye on me. But it's strange how you can try these things. And once again, my brain afterwards, because of everything I'm interested in, was thinking, why was it that? Why wasn't it a dragon? Why wasn't it a skeleton? Why wasn't it the Grim Reaper? What was the symbolism of an owl, for goodness sakes? Now, obviously, there's a lot of weirdness attached to owls. Some are a bit of a reach more than others, shall I say. But owls have always been an intrinsic part of our folklore here in the United Kingdom. And so now, instead of questioning it, Kate, I just embrace it and go, right, I'll buy that. It's meant to be.
Yeah, I absolutely totally agree. When I started out on this journey in earnest, I decided to throw myself into everything. So I trained in Reiki. I did year-long courses in Kabbalah. I did past life regression. I did loads and loads of and I just literally went with it. Just literally went with it. And I was finding things. I'd done a meditation for one of the courses that I was doing, and I was gifted in this meditation. I'd never seen them before, and I can't remember. The thing is, a friend of mine, and you have to excuse my French, a friend of mine said, "Oh, that's Metatron's bollock." And that's now all I can think that it's called. But it's like the star within a star, so it's squares together that make up a three-dimensional star.
Yes.
And I was in this meditation, I was gifted it in tiger's eye. And I had never seen this shape whatsoever. And then it was, I think a couple of weeks later, it was a sort of a hippie craft stall place, and they had one, and like you, I had to buy it, and it's been with me ever since. I carry it around absolutely everywhere. I've got no idea why. I don't think, oh, this thing protects me or it wards things. It's just nice that I've pulled something from this psychic soup around me into my being, and now it's real and solid. It reminds me that there is more going off than just my mind. There's things that are coming from a non-material realm into our psyches that for whatever reason are giving us clues or indications. And very, very early on, one of the teachers that I had, quite rightly so, and especially when I was doing psychic development, he said, make sure you get yourself some really good books on signs and symbols. That'll be your best things that you will have when you're learning psychic development, because the things that you get when you're developing and all the way through sort of psychic development, you get symbols. You don't get the absolute truth. Things come through symbolically. That's kind of how it's imbued into us. You don't get a piece of paper that said John Smith died at this date, it is blah 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 blah, and he was in debt or whatever. You'll get symbols of, you'll see somebody who you know is a John, and you may get somebody who's blacksmithing, and you have to kind of put all these puzzles together because it's not a straight line. And I think with the owl, you may never get to the bottom of why it was, but it's that bringing that something from the ether into reality, and in that quick succession was a moment of, aha, there's more to life than the material realm that we're living in.
It's one of those things, I think, because I've had a few instances in my life where I have vocalised my gut feeling and or found myself following a gut feeling that has put me in a situation where, on reflection, I had to be there. And I can't tell you why I did what I did to put myself somewhere, to be there, to help in a couple of occasions. And when I was talking with my wonderful friend and co-host on my other show, The Ghost Story Guy, we were talking about this because obviously I've spoken about some of these experiences, Kate. And he was like, well, why do you keep fighting it? Why do you keep pushing that away? Because obviously my grandmother was a psychic. The family have always been attached to the strangeness. We've had things, and as I say, I've found myself in situations or done things that I can't explain. There's no rationale for what I've said or what I've done or why I went somewhere at that particular time. And I find it's still a challenge to me, because the situations I've been in that I've done that, I've dealt with them quite well, but afterwards the ramifications and the emotional turmoil, the despair, the sadness of events that have occurred that I'm being involved in make me afraid of it, Kate. And I don't think that's necessarily that I'm scared of embracing my gut feeling. Sometimes I don't like the result of what I do. For you, has that been a challenge to find that balance of embracing it and accepting it to a certain point? Or were you similar, that you perhaps had these kind of feelings, your gut, a sense of something not feeling right, and you pushed it away for so long, and then, as you say, you've just basically embraced everything in you. You've tried to train yourself to make yourself more psychically viable and attuned to the environments around you. And at that point, that's allowed you to be more open and not fight yourself as much in regards to these feelings.
Yeah, I think I very much go down the line, and I do bits and bobs of psychic training with people, and I do go down the line of, we are all psychic. We are all basically spooks in meat suits. So we're all,
Yes.
we're vibrational energies in a material body, which means basically that we can tap into frequencies. We all have the ability. The differences are that some people have more of a sway to that when they're born than others. It's like, people have better sight than other people have better hearing than other people. It's just one of those things that some people are better. I think the biggest challenge for me wasn't the accepting of it, it was the acting on it. And I literally realised, probably far too late in life, that I had what I now call the Jesus syndrome, where it's savior syndrome.
Yes.
So being empathetic is part of being psychic. So you do pick up on people's internal dialogue. Sometimes you pick up on their emotional dialogues. Going around a supermarket for me at the height of this was excruciating. I'd quite often have people telling me their life story, crying the works, and I used to feel so responsible for those people. And it wasn't till I started hearing other people talk about how rude that was for me to take on responsibility for other people's emotions. That's not my job. Your job is to be a soundboard, not to take on their emotions, and it's rude to take them on and to try and dissect them. And then that started getting me thinking about this saviour complex that I've got, where I think now, why do I feel like I have to save people when they are quite capable of doing it on their own, and that's part of their growth in this world? And that for me was the biggest lesson. It was letting that go and thinking, I am not a bad person if I don't carry everybody.
Yes.
It's actually a better person to walk beside somebody and make sure they're easy with how they're walking than try and carry them and drag them at a rate that you're going or a rate you think they should be going. So all that about it's not your responsibility, the outcome. Your responsibility is to weigh up, are you going to be comfortable giving over that information? And I would guarantee that 100% of time you will get the yes answer from yourself. I'm comfortable with giving that over. However, whatever outcome comes from that is nothing to do with you. Nothing to do with you. You can only give what you're given.
Yes.
And then from there on in, it's not your responsibility.
So for you, in regards to that, once you'd fine-tuned yourself, skilled yourself up, got your NVQ in weirdness, shall we say, as we all have, I think, now, at what point did you feel that you'd handed over, some would say, destiny, control, guidance to outside forces? Because I think sometimes we can find ourselves, we gravitate into a specialism or a particular field, even as Forteans, as we've both said, that are fascinated by virtually every aspect of this topic, that you've kind of found yourself firstly embracing the Fae in full, but then that's kind of gone on. This is the other aspect of this, is that for some people, discussing the Fae on a serious manner is quite problematic for them. They can't get past the Tinkerbell stage in their heads. To go from fairies to gnomes, for some people, is even further beyond the pale, Kate, because now we're talking about a genre of little people, a niche in the world of the Fae, because this is often the other thing, that these smaller ethereal beings often all get clumped together, and yet when you drill down into the cases or the experiences or the folklore of regions or the specific stories about them, they're often very different, with very different types of personalities, very different appearances, yet they all seem to exist in this adjacent realm that occasionally either crosses over or allows us to see inside it for some reason.
Yeah, and you're right. And I often wonder whether the colloquialism of these different elements of the fairies are real, that they're colloquial to an area. So we've got pixies down Devon and Cornwall, we've got red caps of the borders of Scotland, we've got very specific beings in very specific environments, and whether they're colloquial because they actually are, or whether they are because the people of that land have imbued that into them. We're talking about beings that can come in and out of our material world, and they can be material and solid, or they can be ethereal. They are mercurial in how they work, and as such they can glamorize themselves, if you like. So there's that aspect to it. Do they come across in a way we understand? That whole theory about aliens come to us in a way we can understand them, and they will overlay. Talking about owls, they'll come as owls before abduction. We know that as a motif to appease the situation in a way that we don't freak out. And I wonder whether sometimes fairies use that tactic as well, where they'll come to us in a certain manner to help us understand who and what they are, maybe what jobs they do, and in a way that we can understand who they are. And prior to the Industrial Revolution, the majority of fairies that are talked about in Europe particularly are small, wizzly old men with long beards and leathery skin. They all seem to be of a very similar ilk. So, you can go from dwarves to Tommyknockers, whatever. You can go all the way around the houses, hobgoblins, etc., etc. All a couple of foot tall, wizzly old men, and kind of gnomes kind of got subsumed into that. And it's a funny one, the word gnome, because there's been this whole to and fro of, are gnomes fairies? Do gnomes, or the name of gnomes, actually belong within the fairy lexicon? And there are people who argue against it because it was a construct of Paracelsus. It was part of his work as an alchemist, where he got the four elements and gave them names, and gnomes were his helpers of the earth to help with his alchemy. So, and then that begs the question of, are fairies actually egregorial? Can we think these things into existence? Is there now a realm of Tinkerbells because we kind of collectively think them into existence? You know, it's just the world's your oyster, really, with the possibilities of what's happening, how it's happening, and especially if you think about them on this energetic exchange as opposed to being material and bound to a place. You know, it's like, well, anything could happen, really. Anything's possible within that realm. Well, they do and they don't. In my mind, they absolutely do. They've got crowning glory within the Fae realm for me.
Yeah. So obviously, you grew up in Nottinghamshire. It made me chuckle because I know exactly the village you grew up in. I've been through it many times. I've never stopped there, okay, but I know exactly where it is, which makes me chuckle when I find out where people originate from or where they spent their childhood and stuff. It's one of those weird things, but I'm just weird in a variety of levels, I think. The Wollaton Gnomes case is fascinating on several levels. It's fascinating for Forteans, I think, because 30 years ago, I don't think people thought that particular encounter, experience, story would have the legs it has. We're here now, 1979, I think it occurred. So it's 46 years afterwards. It's probably never been as well known as it is right now. Why did that story get under your skin? Because I think the fact that it's so weird is a key reason as to why so many people have just not gone anywhere near it. Because I love it, because it's balmy. The whole story, none of it makes sense. And I don't mean that in the fact that it's unbelievable. It doesn't make sense because it's crazy. It's funny. It's strange. We've got multiple witnesses. It all seems like a bit of cheekiness going on. It is one of the maddest cases I can think. If anything, I think it's probably the strangest case on any level that we've had in the UK in the last 50 years, personally.
Definitely up there. Definitely up there. I think for me, I remember, I must have been about 15, picking up a copy of 14 Times, a friend's house, reading, because the headline had Nottingham in it, I had to read it.
Yeah.
So I read it, and I remember being absolutely disgusted that 14 Times would actually print such absolute tosh.
I think I had a very similar reaction.
Yeah, I was like, what on earth is this? This is meant to be a serious journal. You know, how can you even entertain putting this in there? This is obviously the most ridiculous thing ever. How anybody could believe it, I don't know. So off it went, and every now and again it would kind of bubble up in my consciousness, and I'd be like, no, you know, going to Wollaton Hall or whatever, or seeing the signs for Wollaton Hall. You know, from there on in, it was gnomes. You know, it was overlaid with the word gnomes for me every time I saw that sign. And it wasn't until our friend Dr. Simon Young asked me to be part of I was so proud actually that he asked me to be part of a group of people writing about the case, re-examining it within a more modern context. And I'm not as academically passionate in my writing as a lot of the other writers there. You know, I tend to write a little more loosely than I mean, there's some brilliant writers in that anthology of essays.
Yes.
When I was writing it, all I kept getting was, why has nobody asked the really serious questions about this case? And the really serious questions became, for me, why did the gnomes glow? How the hell did they get hovering cars? Where did they come from? Why was their language laughter language? Nobody had ever stopped and said, we need to break all this down. Yes, we've got all this information from the children. We've got all this information from their interviews. We've got information from other people who have had experiences in Wollaton Park that have been fairly similar. We have had people who've been gnome experts who went down there to talk about what gnomes are. We've had the whole gambit, but nobody's gone, well, what about the gnomes? So when I was writing this, we're circling back into the woo-woo here. So when I was writing this, I kept getting the most vivid images of why those things were happening. So I was asking the question, why did the gnomes, how did the gnomes glow? What does that mean, and what's around that? And I was getting the most vivid sort of B-movie images coming through my head. And even before I'd finished that essay, I was so compelled to write their story that it was ridiculous. And I had, the first and foremost was the title of the book. And I contacted Dr. Neil Rushton, good friend of mine, and said, I've got a title for this book. I hate it. I absolutely hate it, but I need to run it by you. Hoping he'd go, no, Kate, that is absolutely freaking awful. Please do not use that as a title. But unfortunately, he said, yeah, you've got to run with that title. You have to run with that title, which turned out to be The Woolly Snots.
Yes.
And I wrote that. I often joke that I was hijacked by and channeled through by the gnomes, because I wrote that book in 7 days.
Wow.
I know. I had literally not even written anything to that extent of a body of work since I was at university. So we're talking years ago. It took me longer to edit it. Yeah. And to do, to start breaking it down so I could go to some publishers, etc. And it was phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. And every time I just thought, I've got no idea where this is going, I would ask the question where this is going, and I'd get this B movie of everything I needed to know for the next step. And it was almost a chapter and a half, 2 chapters a day I was writing. It was crazy.
Yeah. So just pouring out of you.
Yeah. And I said, I genuinely believe it didn't come from me. And when we're talking about imposter syndrome, when I go out and about and I'm talking about my book, I get double imposter syndrome because I don't think I wrote. When I first put it out, I was interviewed about it. Somebody said, I really love the concept that you had about the geese. And I was like, oh, great. And in my head, I was going, geese? I wrote about geese. And it took me a minute to think, oh, there was geese in it. Because that's how little I felt that I had an involvement. It was just like my hand. It's like automatic writing.
Yeah.
But if you, if you look back to sort of, and I'm not saying it's a great work of art. It's great fun, but it's not a Tolkien or anything like that. But if you look back to people who were great artists or who talk about novels they write and whatever, they will often say they go into a trance style space, and these things come to them, and they become a vessel to discharge it into the world, if you like. And that's how I felt with that book. It was so it's Dr. Simon Young's fault that book's out in the world.
I mean, I've got there's a little part of my heart that loves this case, Kate. Yes. Primarily, as I said earlier, because of its all the bits and bobs to it. It's weird. But obviously, I know Nottingham quite well. I've been to Nottingham lots and lots of times for a variety of reasons. For football, visiting friends, clubbing, whatever. Yeah. There's not a lot I haven't done in Nottingham, to be honest. And so when we come in from Sheffield, we go past Wollaton. And so I'd always do that. Whoever I was with, oh, look, that's where the gnomes live. And they go, shut up, you idiot. What are you on about? Gnomes. And depending on who I was with, I would then start telling them the story. Or I'd meet random people in Nottingham and I'd say, do you know about the gnomes in Wollaton? And depending on the time of day I had this conversation, people were more open to it, shall we say. Or, if it was after midnight, people would be more open to a conversation about gnomes living in Wollaton Park, okay, perhaps than having a cup of coffee at 4 p.m, shall we say. And so I always used to be really surprised that I can probably count on one hand the amount of people who knew about that case in the late 90s or heard about it or knew anything about how Wollaton was supposed to be a spooky place to go. Because I think this is the other part of this particular case. Wollaton's smack in Nottingham city centre. It's one of those wonderful parks and beautiful townhouses that you can often find in parts of the north where you've got what, to outsiders, I think, they often perceive that these must be areas in the countryside that you visit that are part of Nottingham. They don't think Nottingham's built around Wollaton, or it's very similar to how we have in Sheffield. We've got 2 or 3 parks. Well, we've got a massive building or an old country pile that has now become part of the council's remit, as it were, and it just happens to be that we've got this park with it as well. And so for me, it's a case that Nottingham really sort of didn't want to embrace for quite a while from an outsider's perspective, and now it's like a little badge of honour, because obviously, you know, the less we say about Nottingham stealing our Robin Hood, the better. You know, he's not called Robin of Locksley for nothing. Which I think you'll find is in Sheffield. But anyway...
All we need is a Yorkshireman in this conversation who would proper have a fight, wouldn't we? Because the Yorkshire take it as is his as well.
Yeah, well, they can say what the rest of them. He's definitely ours. Definitely here in Sheffield. Hey, Little John's buried down the road. It don't get a better argument than that, Kate.
Maybe he was from Sheffield, but you're not claiming Robin.
So for you, as you say, guided by gnomes perhaps, in this particular endeavour, because of Simon Young's sort of asking you to contribute to this, have you been surprised how little people knew about the case, or how dismissive people have been over the years, Kate? And like you say, it's only recently people have really begun to look at these really weird aspects of that case, rather than, as I remember reading years ago, dismissing it as an excuse that one of the boys fell over, got his clothes muddy, and none of them wanted to get into trouble, which I think is leaping at the best of explanations.
Yeah, it's not the only leap I've heard. I have been asked on several occasions, do I think they've been taking magic mushrooms because it was that time of year? But that was another kind of leap. But you're right, the people of Nottingham, I've took my book around, done different markets, talked to different people up and down the country, not just in Nottingham. And I think probably about 3 in every 100 people that I talk to have heard about it, and probably one in every 100 person have been just out of the blue bizarre. Like, there was a lady that I met. She was probably, I don't know, I put her in her early 70s. And she came up, she picked up the book, and I said, have you heard of the Wollaton Gnomes? She said, yes, I'm from Nottingham originally. And I said, it's very rare that I find somebody who's heard of them. And she said, my childhood home backed onto the park, and we all knew that there was weird stuff that went on. And apparently her dad used to be adamant. She said her dad was a very kind of he was one of the gardeners there or something, one of the groundskeepers. Yeah. And she said he was a very kind of no nonsense man, but would quite often say that there were these things at the bottom of the garden, which I was just like, what? You're very rare to find somebody who knows about it, but you lived literally backing onto Wollaton, and from there on in, it's just been little bits of cases that have come up. Like you say, I mean, Wollaton Park is just ghost stories, strange lights, just weird phenomena that go hand in hand with this kind of case of the gnomes. But Marjorie T. Johnson's book, Finding Fairies, she documents. She's a Nottinghamshire lass, or was, bless her soul, was a Nottinghamshire lass. Yeah. And in documenting like lots of fairy encounters, the ones that are from Nottingham, I think there's 1, maybe 2 from Wollaton Park, and they are little men. So people have had sightings right from, I think it was 1900, or, round about that time, that people said that they'd had these encounters in that park. And quite recently I found out that there was an encounter around about the same time as the Wollaton Gnomes, where the child obviously knew nothing about the Wollaton Gnomes, but saw a little gnome in one of the wooded areas, and have come forward recently, and quite credibly, that it's quite a credible case that's come forward. So yeah, I mean, when I start talking about it, I do exaggerate it now. I like to exaggerate the ridiculous nature of it, but I also like to bring that back down into in the modern sense. It's one of our most well documented fairy cases. It's not quite up there with the Cottingley fairies and the amount that we've got, but it's not far off. I mean, I was really lucky to have a very, very brief conversation with the headmaster who had interviewed the children the Tuesday after. So this encounter happened on the Sunday. He interviewed them and had the absolute light bulb moment to record it. So he recorded onto tape his interviews with the children, to which the Fae Investigation Society has that tape, and he has not been able to tracked down. And not come forward and spoke about it since. Bizarrely enough, I used to work in education, and one of my I was in the county, so he worked in the city, obviously in the school. I worked in the county, and my county boss actually knew him because he rose up in the ranks to become a city boss in education. So I contacted him on the off chance. So, do you know this guy? And he was like, "Oh yeah, he's a good friend of mine, but I haven't seen him for many years." And this is how tenacious I get with my research. I get a bit between my teeth, and I have to keep going.
Yeah.
So I did some more scrolling, some more searching, and I found out that a friend of mine who I lived with at university, bizarrely enough, are good family friends with him. And I was like, what on earth is going on?
Yeah.
So I literally got about 10 minutes, if that, with him, a phone conversation. He was very guarded about talking about it because he said, I don't know what more I could add. But for me, the kind of defining moment, and the one that was the cherry on the cake for all the research that I've been doing, I asked him, did you believe the children? Very matter of fact, and he's he a very well loved head teacher, but he was very old school. So I took what he said as a nice thing to say and not a horrendous thing to say. But he said, "Of course I believe them because they didn't have the imagination to make this up." He knew his children. He knew the children of the school, and he said they didn't have the imagination to be able to make this up. And for me, that was just like, there's this very well-educated man. He's not wanted to talk about this case for a very, very long time. But that one question for me just sort of compounded that there was definitely something in this. There was definitely something in this. What that is, got lots of different theories about what it might have been, what might have happened. If we find the kids, because that's the other thing, the kids are they're obviously adults now in the 50s and 60s. If we ever do sort of have time to talk to them, which nobody has ever tracked them down, and if they all turn around from the same hymn sheet and say, yeah, we all made it up, or we all made it up, Patrick fell in the mud, so we all made it up, or Angela really wanted us to believe in this, we all made it up, I'd be like, I'd just as much fascination for the case, because it would be like, why gnomes then? Why on earth? Why gnomes?
Yeah.
Why on earth would you make up gnomes? Aliens would be much cooler.
Well, I was about to say the same, because it's so odd and really specific, as you say. And the thing I've always found about Wollaton is, for me, there are two cases of that era. They're quite similar, but very different, if that makes sense, which is Wollaton and Broadhaven, where you have a teacher who for some reason believes his children and makes them all write statements and do drawings and things. And therefore, this is the other aspect. We're talking about education in Britain in the 1970s, Kate. The fact that a teacher would believe children talking about such odd subjects in such a way as to say, fine, I want you to document everything you can remember, that is another striking aspect of both of those cases, because once again, they are really out there, because it would be really easy to dismiss it as just silly, childish. It's a joke, it's a game, everybody's overexcited. Why 2 years after Broadhaven, which was widely reported, Close Encounters was everywhere, Star Wars, aliens were the thing at the end of the 70s for kids of a certain vintage, me included. Why on earth did they choose gnomes? It would have been far easier for them to say it's an alien or a ghost. Gnomes in flying cars is so far out there that even if that story's made up, that doesn't make sense on any level, for me anyway.
No. No, it doesn't. And these were street savvy kids. These weren't from middle class homes. They were working class kids. They would have been savvy. So putting themselves in the line of being ridiculed in a playground was probably not something that they'd have wanted to do. And I mean, even at the ages of 8, 9, 10, you know, having going into a playground when you are that street savvy in the 70s and saying those things, they would have been shot down and mocked. It's not a safe. It wasn't a safe thing to take into the playground. If they, like you say, if they'd have gone in and said, "Oh, we've seen little grey aliens," I think there would have been a bit more street cred to them. You know, other people around going, "Wow, they've said, well, let's go into the park and see if we can find the aliens." You know, but saying, "Let's go into the park and see if we can find the gnomes" at age 10 or 11, you'd be like, what are you doing? What are you doing?
Because that's about the age you start to leave your childhood behind. In that early childhood, I mean.
Yeah.
Where the power of imagination begins to lose its thrall over children. Reality begins to pull you away, be it sport, reading, entertainment, fashion, whatever. You kind of go away from these kind of imaginary concepts of make-believe and pretend. And you would even say children 7, 8, 9 years old have probably left those kinds of concepts behind depending on their social environment, I would suggest, Kate.
Yeah.
It's kind of that early year nursery age where kids have this. But then again, you fall into this imaginary friend thing, which is another topic I find both deeply fascinating and quite frightening on occasion, looking at some of these things. And I think when children are involved in any kind of high strangeness, it's very rare that you have adults who will embrace them, protect them and say yes. And I often say, well, where do you draw the line in what you believe children tell you? Because without wishing to darken the tone, if they were talking about assault or terrible behaviour from adults in their life, would we not believe them either then? At what point does a child's believability become? Is it because it's in reality, or it's something that we know happens, or is it something that's so fantastical? And as he said, these children didn't have the imagination to craft such a story and to be so, like you say, oddly specific, weirdly different. It's a real outlier. It's never been repeated. We've not had people pretending that there are other gangs of gnomes bothering other groups of children in other areas, where you've seen other UFO stories or ghost stories kind of develop a life of their own or infect or infiltrate other areas, and we have almost carbon copy stories being told in different areas, Kate. This has still remained fairly unique in regards to the amount of witnesses, the length of time, and the believability of the adults that dealt with it.
I mean, we can only imagine what that first few days of those children going into the playground, how the headmaster actually found out. I've been to the school because I wanted to get a feel for the school as well, and I took a load of books over, you know, just to get the kids excited that it was something that happened in their school and everything else. And the thing is, I worked in education for many, many years, so you kind of get a flavour of how these things went. And I do wonder whether it was partly an appeasement to say, okay, then, you know, you're all getting hyped up about this, you know, kids coming into the classroom and saying, oh, these kids have seen gnomes, and everybody talking about gnomes, and it was partly an appeasement to get the kids in and talk to them about it. That doesn't sit quite right to me. When you actually listen to the questions, how the interview was conducted, it wasn't a lead in and it wasn't closed. So it didn't feel like an appeasing practice to say, okay, then kids, let's get your story down, get you out of here, and let's get back to school as normal. It was very controlled how he interviewed the kids. There were a few leading questions, but not a lot. And he sat and listened to their responses, and he asked questions to their responses. I really don't know. I know that the headmaster, he was Christian at the time, and now he's very devout Christian. So that again makes me think, you know, how did that influence how he thought about the situation, where he kind of put that experience into understanding of the world. I think from all accounts he was a very nurturing head teacher, as much as you could have been in the 70s, and understood his children. It's quite a small school in terms of a city school. It's quite a small school anyway in terms of a town or a city, so he would have known all his children. But it's those questions for me still really interest me. What got them to that point where they were being interviewed, where he was documenting it, because it did sound like he was documenting it because in a purposeful way.
Yes.
Like there was significance in it, as opposed to let's get them all to shut up and get on with the rest of school life. I think one of the strange things as well that came out of it was Nottinghamshire as a whole isn't great at self-advertising, self-publicising. I mean, the village that I live is absolutely shocking for it. But when I started researching this, I hadn't been to Wollaton Park since I was a kid, and I decided to go back and expected, because of the association with the case, there to be a reference in Wollaton Hall, or there to be some kind of, I would have a gnome trail there,
Yes.
knowing how popular these things are with kids. There was one very sorry cut out wooden gnome that was sat in the corner of the courtyard looking like he'd just been thrown there, and even he disappeared after a year. I went back and I was like, the gnome's gone. He's gone. Where has he gone? So I don't know whether the Nottinghamshire people, and I'm one of them, so I can say this, we're funniosities, and I'm sure it's the same sort of Sheffield way, where don't talk rubbish, that kind of mentality, that believing in something like that and being a head teacher and believing in something like that is quite phenomenal in Nottingham. I mean, in other counties, you'd think, okay, more accepting of these things. I mean, I'm sure it's the same way you are. People are like, oh, don't be stupid, about such things.
Yeah, Sheffield's a bit odd when it comes to its weird history. Okay, you're quite right, and it's only recent. I mean, here we now hear Dr. David Clarke and his team have set up the Centre of Folklore at Sheffield Hallam. We've become a hub of that. So they've dealt with the new Folklore Society. That's all come through them. They're dealing with it, looking at the results and delving into things. People I've got to know, or people that I knew in my previous life as a pub landlord. Some of my regulars are now members of the Folklore team at Sheffield Hallam. Dr. Rogers was a very regular in my pub, and I'm delighted to see how successful she's gone as life has continued. And getting to know somebody like Dr. David Clarke, who was somebody I used to admire from a distance and think one day I might bump into him in Sheffield. Never mind having his number in my phone now and being able to chat whenever we wish. But that's the kind of situation, because Sheffield has so many odd things. I mean, we're the birthplace of the Crying Boy flap. That started in Rotherham. Ironically, David Clarke was the reporter at the time who covered that story. So we've been here. We've got the Peak District full of weird places and standing stone circles and some of the biggest Neolithic sites between both of us, between Sheffield and Nottingham. We've got this wonderful tranche of history between us that's full of these magical places, the Standing Sisters and the like. And it's just an area full of magic and mystery and myth. And yet I think because we're both post-industrial cities, we've had our DNA rewired to deal with nuts and bolts reality. Bits of metal, bits of coal, cloth, whatever we can, tangible things. And it's over the last 10 years, Sheffield has started to be more accepting of its weirdness. We've got a brilliant ghost trail here. We've got a folklore society that is full of young people in their 20s and 30s, which blew me away. I was also glad I wasn't the oldest person there, but it was so wonderfully surprising to see so many young people interested in folklore and myth and magic that it took me back. I have to say, I was a little surprised. So it shows it's there, and it's also tied up in this fascinating rebirth, as I said earlier in our conversation, Kate, of how folklore seems to have really captured the generation after us, whereas we seem to have fought for it and dug into it, and we were always pushed out to the margins. And now the people who've come behind us, whether us knocking those doors down have allowed it to become easier, but I think social media's had a lot to do with it, as well as this kind of disassociation from modernity. People don't like the world as it is these days. It's all buy, everything's disposable. Nothing, there doesn't seem to be any credit given to things that give us joy if we can't stream it or wait 16 hours for it to be delivered on demand. And yet the younger generation seem to be, no, we don't want that. No, thank you. We've seen how this has been for the last 30 years. No, thank you. We're drifting away. And especially, I think, in regards to paganism and Wicca, which really seems to have been propelled a little, if not more so, by the rise of feminism and the balance of equality and how we should be. And that, I think, has also really fired up a lot of younger people, which I think is amazing.
Yeah, I think so. And I think you're right in all that, that there is, we see this generationally, don't we? We kind of kick back from our parents' generation, the way they lived, etc. And you get these kickbacks. But I think even more so when you get the rise of any kind of spiritualism, whether it's the spiritualism of the weird, the spiritualism of the woo, the spiritualism of paganism, whatever it is, it's usually in a time when people need to feel grounded and rooted to their land and to their heritage. And really want to feel a sense of belonging. And I think that the in-between generation, the kind of the now 30-year-olds, are probably the ones who, and I tell you that where I noticed this most was in music. So 10 years ago, the young people that I was working with, they didn't seem to have a genre of music that they were into. It was just like this cacophony of just everything, absolutely everything from every different sort of generation. I mean, when I was growing up, you were either a one thing or another thing when it came to music, and that's how we identified ourselves in a tribe.
Yeah.
And there was no sense of identification amongst these young people. They were just kind of lost in this kind of gloopy sea of culture with nothing kind of sticking, nothing stuck. And then the generation that came after started discovering vinyl again. They were buying records again, and buying actual books and going to bookshops, and all these things that were tangible and solid. So you have got this real urge to feel rooted in belonging and an understanding of yourself. And I think paganism has the elements of that. I mean, I'm a bit disappointed in paganism, if I'm going to be completely honest with you, just to go off on a side quest. For me, I discovered sort of paganism as a philosophy when I was probably about 11 years old, and I knew that was right for me. And I always said I was an atheist with a pagan philosophical leaning, because it wasn't a religion. It wasn't a religion. And then all of a sudden it's a bloody religion. It's like, hold on, if I'd have wanted religion, I'd have gone to church. Paganism is about ploughing your own path, but doing it within natural laws. That's it. That is it. There is no deities that you have to worship if you don't want to. There's no days of the week that you have to do certain things if you don't want to. As long as you live within a natural rhythm and a natural law, there is nothing else you have to do. If you want to do those things, you do. But as soon as it became a religion, it was like, no, it's not. It's absolutely not. So me and the word paganism have had a bit of a fallout. I've got to find a new word for it. It's probably rebellious. I'm rebellious.
Yes, I've often found that really odd, because I've always been one of those people. I've always liked all kinds of genres, and so I always used to find it odd where I would encounter people, say if I was at a rave or at a concert, depending on it, and they were only into that, and I'd be like, okay, why does that not work for me? And I don't know whether it's because I hit my teenage years at the end of the 80s, where we had so much happening and it was all so good that we didn't bother with genres, but obviously at the same time, other people in different parts of the country were focusing on that. They were only into dance music. They were only into indie. They were only metalheads. They were only goths. Whereas I loved it all. I mean, the thing is, I'm not a big fan of black clothes, which might sound so, not because I don't want to appear musically as a goth. It's just that I don't like the fact how quickly they fade, and I'll need to replace them because I'm quite funny like that. That's it. Because really, I should be wandering around with Depeche Mode and New Order t-shirts on all the way, looking quite sad all the time to some people, because I love both of those bands. But they're both very different. But for me, they're intrinsically two of our greatest bands that this country's ever produced. But they're very genre specific. New Order just like to annoy people because sometimes they're an indie band and sometimes they're a dance band and sometimes they're a bit of both. Sometimes they just don't bother releasing a record for 10 years and falling out all the time. However, that's a different kettle of fish. And so it's weird that we're now in that kind of situation where I think genres are so malleable now. And it seems to be the same kind of thing in modern society, that the younger generations are saying, literally, stop the world, I want to get off, because there's nothing for them to nail their colours to. It's all too much. It's everything all at once. And for some of us, that's too much. We want to step back. It's probably why, like you say, vinyl, I mean, I'd always kept mine because I'm a weird collector of a variety of things. So I'd always save mine. To see it come back and now be super cool, even cooler than I was when I was a kid, I still can't get my head round that at the minute vinyl sales are bigger than they were when I was a kid, which is mind-blowing. Going into a shop and seeing cassettes for sale, Kate, what the hell is happening here? And apparently Walkmans are really cool again, and people are searching out Walkmans because they don't want to listen to music on their phone anymore. And I'm like, hang on, when did something, was the pandemic... actually, did we all fall into a different dimension? Because things have been a bit odd for the last 5.5 years on a variety of levels.
But I think that did it, didn't it? And I suppose that as an adult, missing that amount of time in normal society is one thing. But if you're a kid, 2-3 years of that kind of disruption is going to do something really odd, and that disassociation and that disconnect and a desperation for wanting to find your tribe and wanting to find people to connect with again. And that did come through the colours of the T-shirts that we wore when we were younger.
Yes.
And the fact that, you'd spot a punk a mile off and knew that they were a punk, So you knew who, generally what people you were going to get on with in life and those that you probably weren't going to get on with so much. But it was all very coded, wasn't it? But we all knew the code. And then it kind of just pitted out where everything just became so dilute, and then again we have this renaissance, and I think that is where the renaissance in folklore is coming from.
Yes.
I saw somebody, and I can't remember her name, talking yesterday, and she was saying that folklore is making a revival because there is a solid understanding now that folklore is modern. It is everything. It's the people's voice. It's the people's story. It's the people's culture. It's the people's language. And when people start getting that and cluing into that, that people embrace it and think we have something. We have a voice. We have a voice together, and it's under this banner of folklore. This is our law. This is our voice. And I just thought that was genius, because we think of folklore and we think medieval, pre-Victorian at least, and that kind of thing. We don't think folklore is yesterday or today, do we?
Exactly. No, I completely agree, and I think for some of us, it's when you understand that. That's when it all begins to make sense, I think.
Yeah.
And it is, because I think for a lot of people as well, there's a lot of truth to some of folklore. There's a lot of meaning to it. And as you say, for a lot of people, it's rediscovering your local area. It's rediscovering your history. It's rediscovering your family, I think, as well. Because, as you say, we've got this kind of post-industrialised stripping of the old ways, the old magic, the seers, the sayers, the wise women round the corner or whatever. Whereas when I was growing up, you could kind of see that was still hanging out in certain parts of the UK, depending on, Cumbria, I would imagine, Cornwall, especially, Devon, Dorset, remote places which is crazy when you think about 50 years ago, like remote places in the United Kingdom. What are you talking about? But they were, because that's why their folklore's so intrinsically different. We live in a country that can't even decide on what the proper name for a spectral black dog is, because wherever you are.
Hold on, I thought you were going to have the cob argument then. Is it cob, bap or roll? I thought we were going to go down that road then.
Well, you see here, this is the other thing. Exactly. See, you lot call it cob. Here it's called a bread cake. Where I grew up in Barnsley, it's known as a bap or a tea cake. But in Sheffield, a tea cake's got currants in.
Exactly.
Whereas, so that even in South Yorkshire cake, they can't even agree on what it's called. You go to Manchester, it's a barm.
Barm cake, yeah.
I remember the first time I went to a football match in Manchester, and my mate, who was a Man City fan, said, "Whatever you do, don't ask for a chip butty, ask for a chip barm. Because if you ask for a chip butty, they'll know you're not from Manchester." Yeah. And I was like, eh? And even in the chip shop, it was written chip barm. £2.
Yeah. Yeah. But this is part of folklore, isn't it? Yes. I mean, the humble chip cob. I went into Wales. I was down in Barry not so long ago, and I went in with a friend of mine who lives there, and he said, "Oh, what do you want to eat?" And I said, "Oh, I want a chip cob and some mushy peas." And he went, "You want a what?" And I said, "I want a chip cob." And he said, "You've got to ask him. You've got to ask him." And so I was like, "All right then." And they were like, "You want a what?" And I kind of had to point. And they said, I think they said, did they say, no, they said roll, which I found very bizarre, because that's a southern thing. I know that from living down south, a roll is bread. Yeah. But this absolutely highlights folklore perfectly, doesn't it? That kind of, and the friendly banter that we have in this country over a piece of bread. Yeah. I mean, everybody has this conversation, don't they, at some point with somebody from a different area. What do you call your cob? What do you call, and that's folklore. That's folklore in live in action, isn't it?
Absolutely is. And it just shows you that these little nuances just affect every aspect of our lives. And for often, it's so ingrained in us that we don't even realise it. Like I was saying to somebody the other week, I always laugh at people who say, "I don't believe in folklore." And then they'll go, "Knock on wood." Yeah. Well, what are you doing there then? What's that? Is that just magic then, mate? Why are you knocking on wood? You're knocking on wood for good luck, which is folklore.
Or blowing out birthday candles, or putting up Christmas trees, or all these other things that are absolutely, paganistic rituals and from our historical folklore past, and people don't realise that they're doing it. Another bugbear, and I always sound really grumpy when I do it, is I don't celebrate Christmas. I do sound really grumpy. I come across like the right Grinch, and I have multiple spats with people, not arguments but spats, and I'll be like, "Well, why do you celebrate Christmas?" "Oh, because it's a great time," and blah 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 blah. It's like, you either celebrate it as a Christian or you celebrate it as somebody with pagan beliefs, and the two are very, very similar, but there's different ways of doing it. And I try to explain that if there are things that are set, especially through folklore, things that are set because there are certain times of the year where energetically there's a heightened vibe, if you like. So celebrating on Yule on the 21st of December, that is the time when the day, when we're going over into the light again. The magic, there is a magic at that point that's been shifted by Christianity to a few days forward. Yeah. So you lose the magic that you should be using at that time. And I'm sure that Christian time has its own magic within it, because that's part of the folklore that's imbued to Christianity. But if we don't honour these times and spaces, we're actually dissipating a collective magic. We're kind of dissipating it if we don't understand why we're doing it. If we just do it because that's what we do. If we just throw up a tree and we don't know why we're throwing up a tree, or if we put up a tree. I mean, I was always a traditionalist, 12 days before, 12 days after, because there is a 12-day build-up and there's a 12-day sort of coming down from that period of time.
Yeah.
Anybody puts it up in November, oh my goodness, do I have a bugbear with them? It's like, it's literally, you're dissipating the magic. There is magic in having it within that time, you know. Yeah, I could rant about this for a long time, especially about Christmas.
Yeah, my tree's been up 3 weeks, Kate.
Oh, I wouldn't have put you down as an early Christmas tree or a putter-upper.
Yeah, I see. I'm an atheist with pagan leanings who loves Christmas. I understand the duality of it, Kate, and I can't explain it. I just love it.
That's not duality. That sounds like multiple personality disorder. That does. I'm an atheist, pagan leaning, but I love Christmas.
Yeah, you kind of summed me up perfectly there, Kate.
Oh, bless you. I'm sorry if I insulted you with that rant.
You didn't insult me in the slightest at all.
You
Otherwise,
don't care.
if you had, I wouldn't. Well, yes, I don't care. I'm a big believer, you know what I mean? If I'm running around the house on houses on the 10th of November saying, "Why is your tree not up?" That's a problem. Whereas for me, I don't really care. I like to.
Yeah.
I think that's the earliest. It's like a running. My friend, this is something I've done for yonks. Like we're talking 30 years. I would always want to trim up early. I don't know, because it gave me joy. And I probably didn't understand it. Maybe I'm harking back to childhood and full houses and families and laughter and happiness. I think there's a lot of that for some people with it. But also, I understand now the rules and regulations around it. And I just think, I don't care. I'm gonna plough my own furrow. I mean, I've got pagan-themed dressings on my tree. I've got a Yeti on my tree. I've got a Dover demon on my tree. But I've also got some lovely Victorian baubles. So even on my Christmas tree, Kate, I'm showing multiple personality disorder.
You're never going to forgive me for saying that, are you?
No, don't be daft. Honestly. I've been called a lot worse. And a lot less closer to home than you just said.
Oh, bless you.
So, I mean, as I prepare to let you leave, Kate, what's next for you? As we said, you've really developed a niche in our field, you know what I mean? And as I said at the beginning, everything, all the compliments I've given you, I mean most genuinely. You're a lovely person. It's been fabulous to get to know you even better. And everybody I've met at events and stuff, solidified friendships that have only been done over the phone or in interview or by email even on occasions. It gives me a real thirst for this, and conversations like this just make me joyous inside because as I said earlier, it's clearly what I should have been doing for years. And it took me a while to get there. And when I did, it probably saved my life. However, you've just continued to add facets to it. Your wonderful books, your wonderful articles you do for Haunted Magazine, the show you do, your own podcast, you're guesting on other shows and things. What is next for you? What does 2026 have in store?
Well, I was looking back at this year with absolute gratitude. I mean, I kicked off this year on Coast to Coast Radio, which is the big sort of paranormal show over in America. And I didn't even know what show I was going on. When they said Coast, did you want to come on Coast to Coast? I was like, yeah, all right. And thinking it was some kind of backwater hillbilly show. I'd never even heard
Really?
of it. Never even heard of it. And then I found out it was George Norrie, and I was like, I know George Norrie, I know of him, and it's totally panicked. So that kind of set the tone for the year, and it's just been, I'll have a few weeks that are quite quiet, and then somebody will come along and say, do you fancy doing this? And I'm the kind of person who, if somebody said, will you stick your fingers in a plug socket just to find out if your hair stands up? I'd be like, yeah, I'll do that. So I've been really blessed this year with people sort of wanting me along for the ride with stuff that they've been doing, and obviously being asked to some fantastic places to go and talk. Some I've muscled in on and said, I'd love to talk it, just to be part of it. And I've met some fantastic people on the way, and I'm hoping that next year is going to be pretty much of the same. if not ramped up a bit. So I'm kind of putting it out to the universe. I want more of this stuff. I say that, and I'll be absolutely cramming stuff in. And I've been doing quite a bit of filming with different people this year, which has been absolutely amazing. And I'm in the thick of it. I'm thinking, oh, I'm so exhausted. This is exhausting, you day after day after day. And it's especially when you're doing the investigations and you're sleeping very little, and you're having to keep going and keep sharp and keep buoyant. And I get to the end of it and think, oh, I've loved it. It's been dead exciting, but I need to go back in and get some kit. And then 2 days later, I'm like, right, what's next? I'm bored now. I need to do something. I'm bored. Yeah. So I'm hoping next year is going to be ramped up. Of course, I mean my diary's filling up already. I do I go out and do regular ghost hunt events. So we've got some new events next year. We've got Oxford, the tunnels in Oxford. Can't remember what the above building is. We've got some of the regular places that we go to doing events, so they're kind of stacking up. In the book, we've got Parameet, which is going to be fantastic in that summer solstice.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know what else I've got. Bits and bobs of filming that are already penciled in there, but I'm just like, next year for me is just going to be bring it on in bucket loads. Kill me off. I want next year to kill me off. That's what I want.
So, Kate, it's been absolutely fabulous for you joining me for the first time. I'm sorry it's taken so long for me to invite you. I'm delighted that you've been here and spent so long in my company. I appreciate it. Where can everybody follow you online, get your books, keep up to date, order one of your beautiful gnomes, whatever? Tell us where they can find all things Kate Rae.
I'm not very technically advanced, so I'm on 2 social media platforms. I'm on Instagram and I'm on Facebook. So if you put into the internet Kate Hair Girl, one word, hair as in bunny rabbit, not as in hair, I'll come up. On Amazon, you can find both of my books about the gnomes. I have recently co-authored 2, coming up to 3 books, which will be should be available on Amazon pretty soon. So that's really exciting, and there is talks around expanding them out, which is amazing. The gnomes you can buy direct from me. Just find me on Facebook. Have a look through my photos and go, I like that name. Have you still got it? And then we can send it out for an adoption. And I think that's... Oh, and Hair in the Hawthorn, of course. I've got the podcast. I always forget about the podcast. Hair in the Hawthorn. So we talk about everything weird with a fairy leaning. So I try and sort of lean towards the fairy to kind of explain fairy phenomena. But I've had some phenomenal guests, and I must get you on. I want to talk all things poltergeist with you.
I would be delighted to join you at your convenience. So whenever you can fit me in, I'll be there for you, my love. No problems in the slightest. I would be humbled and honoured. I always am. I'm always chuffed when somebody asks me. But I mean, it is strange sometimes how you can have opportunities appear, like you say about Coast to Coast. Coast to Coast was one of the things I was really excited about getting the internet for at the end of the 90s, so I could listen to Art Bell, because I'd heard of Art Bell, but we couldn't get it in the UK. It was on some kind of show. I think it was on a station in London back in the old days where you could only get your radio what was. And then the internet turned up and we had digital radio. I'm like, what? I can now listen. And so it still makes me smile when people say, oh, I've gone on Coast to Coast. I didn't know anything about it. And you're like, do you know 20 million people listen to that?
I know, I shit myself. I'm sorry for my French. Honestly, when I found out literally the night before what I was going into, because it was a friend of mine who said, I've put your name forward, just send off your bio. And then I messaged them the night before and said, can you give me a bit more info? And so I just look it up online, and looked it up online, and I just went into serious meltdown. Because I just understood instantly the magnitude of it. It was just, and I was sat here in my room, I don't know, 6 a.m. in the morning, half asleep,
Yes.
Still in my pajamas, and I was online for 2 hours, just being petrified, absolutely petrified.
Well played you. Bravo for getting on there. Well done.
I don't know how I did.
We do, don't we? They made it happen, Kate.
The others made it happen.
Thank you so much for your time, your wonderful conversation and your thoughts. It's been a real pleasure, Kate. I wish you and yours the very best for Yule and the new year.
Thank you.
And I'll be happy to join you whenever you need me to come on and talk all things that go bump in the night. All the very best, and thank you again.
Thank you for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure.